So now we've covered a couple of those frequently asked questions. Let's talk a little bit about the expanded value proposition of cyber deception. So far, we have talked about cyber deception exclusively as a method for detecting bad guys on the network. That is nowhere near the full set of values that you get from a cyber deception perspective. So we'll start off with just this concept of distraction and delay. Right? Even if the bad guy doesn't become aware they're interacting with deceptive resources, if they are interacting with deceptive resources, that means they are not interacting with my production resources. They are not causing me actual harm. And the longer I can keep the bad guys distracted, the longer I can delay their interaction with my production resources, the fact is that it gives me more time to detect and then to effectively respond to the bad guys. And even if the bad guys do become aware, as we talked about before, the fact is that deception will slow down even the most motivated, even the most skilled and sophisticated of attackers. So not only do we get a cool detection capability, but even in the time it takes to do that detection, even if we don't detect the instant the bad guy gets on the network, the fact of the matter is there is a likelihood that the bad guys will be interacting with our deceptive resources. We have distracted them away from production, and we have delayed their facilitation of their goals. And that is a win any way that we look at it. Now, the other super amazing benefit has to do with cyber threat intelligence. Now, normally, if you want to collect environment-specific cyber threat intelligence, so cyber threat intelligence that is specific to your environment, you would need to suffer a security breach. And you would need to incur the harm that is associated with that security breach. Now, if I'm going to suffer a security breach, I absolutely want to collect cyber threat intelligence. In other words, make the best of a bad situation. But what about if I could collect environment-specific cyber threat intelligence without needing to suffer the harm associated with a data breach? And that is also entirely possible with cyber deception. When I develop my cyber deception, I can create deceptive resources that are very similar to my production resources. Those resources, those deceptive systems, are going to be instrumented. There's going to be lots of monitoring capabilities and logs that are being collected and all this kind of cool stuff. So what that means is when an attacker gets in my network and I detect them, and if they're interacting with just my deceptive resources, I don't need to kick them off my network. I can watch what they do. What tools do they use? What behaviors do they exhibit? What are the indicators of compromise? How can I detect them again if they take the same actions? What are their motivations? What do they appear to be going after? I can learn all of this stuff. Now, all of that knowledge I can use to improve not only my traditional security program, but I can use it to improve my deception. The more I know about attackers' behavior and motivations, the more I can strategically place deceptive resources that are keyed to the attacker's behavior. So effectively, cyber deception allows us to create better threat intelligence. Better threat intelligence allows us to create better security controls, including better cyber deception, which allows us to collect better threat intelligence, which allows us to do better deception, and that cycle just continues. So really, really awesome, and all of that is done while we are incurring little or no actual harm. Now, we also talked about another benefit briefly in this aspect of deterrence. Now, there's a couple different ways that deterrence can be accomplished from a deception perspective. First of all, the attacker could discover they're in a deceptive environment, realize that that is way beyond their pay grade, and they're going to go someplace else. So we could stop the attack by effectively letting or having the attacker discover the deception. I don't want to do that intentionally, but that also becomes a good byproduct if my deception is detected. But we can use deception to deter attacks before they even happen. I can place deceptive blog postings. I can place deceptive information out in the public forum that makes it appear that my environment is far more secure than it actually is. And an attacker interested in attacking me might be like, well, hey, wait a minute. These guys seem like they have their act together. I'm going to go find an easier target. Now, there's also a third, more subtle way of deterrence. And that boils down to the understanding the process that attackers take. If we look at something like the Lockheed Martin, so Lockheed Martin put together something called their cyber kill chain. And as they look at it, they basically have identified the major steps that attackers must take to facilitate an attack. The first two of those steps are reconnaissance and weaponization. Reconnaissance is when the attackers attempt to learn about the target they're going to attack, and weaponization is when they take that knowledge and use it to create their actual exploits or their malware or whatever it happens to be. Well, if I can disrupt the reconnaissance by lying to the attackers effectively, that means that they will have a false understanding of what my environment looks like. And that false understanding will cause them to incorrectly weaponize for my environment. And therefore, when they try to launch their attacks, those attacks are going to fail because they have been designed inappropriately based on the attacker being fed false information. So that's really, really awesome, and you can do that. We can also use cyber deception as a method for threat hunting. Now, when we talk about traditional threat hunting, what we're talking about is proactively investigating our environments. The fact is that attackers are on our networks for some prolonged period of time before we detect them. So at any given time, if we decide to go out and try to look for attackers, there is a likelihood we're going to find them. Now, when we apply deception into this, we've got to do a couple things, but it also provides us with some super amazing value. So if I just want to go do some threat hunting, what I can do is over the course of a few days, I can add resources. Now, these would be deceptive resources. I'm going to add deceptive resources to my environment. Now, I'm not going to do it in a way that it's overly obvious. I'm not just going to suddenly spin up 500 fake systems when the rest of my network only has 200, right? Like, I'm not going to do something super obvious. What I'm going to do is make it seem like I am now adding a new application or reorganizing into a new department or whatever. Come up with a storyline that would be an operational thing that would normally happen. Implement deception or the deception technology that follows that storyline. So if a bad guy's already on your network, this is going to appear like something normal is going on. Well, the bad guy is going to be interested in these new resources. When the bad guy interacts with the resources, you catch them. Looking at this from we talk about cyber trapping, we talk about cyber hunting. Well, let's put the corollary between actual physical hunting and physical trapping. Hunting is typically considered an active process. The hunter goes out into the wilderness and they stalk or they are actively pursuing whatever their quarry, their game happens to be. There's a lot of effort that is put into hunting. Whereas if you are trapping, you go out and you deploy your traps, but then you go back and you sit at home or wherever you're going to do and you simply wait. It is a much more low effort way of capturing whatever your game happens to be. Well, the same thing applies when we talk about threat hunting, or we'll call it threat trapping. By deploying deception, we are effectively setting traps for the attackers. It is a much more low activity way of detecting bad guys. So we can literally incorporate cyber deception into our threat hunting process to be able to do proactive threat hunting, but do it without requiring a lot of active user involvement or active security professional involvement. Now, another thing that we can do, and so far we've got more rapid detection, we've got delay, we've got deterrence, we've got the collection of threat intelligence, we've got threat hunting that we can incorporate with cyber deception. Another cool thing that we can do involves active attacker engagement. Now, I want to be super clear. When I talk about active attacker engagement, I am not talking about hacking back. What I am talking about is manipulating the story that we are presenting to the attackers in real time. We have a really hard time in current modern cybersecurity actively engaging the attacker. And part of that is because we have a hard time detecting the bad guys on there. A lot of our detective solutions are known for generating a large quantity of false positive alerts. Studies have shown that in the average security operations center, 1 out of 3 alerts is a false positive. So SOC analysts have to spend a lot of time trying to weed through those false alerts. If we can't effectively detect a bad guy on our network, we can't actively respond to them because we don't have the resources to do that, particularly when 1 out of 3 of those instances is going to be a false positive. But as we've talked about before, cyber deception provides what is in effect a high fidelity, low noise detective solution. Once we have that, we can now begin to actively engage with the attacker, interact with the attacker in basically real time. Because deception involves effectively telling the attacker a story that's not true, we can manipulate that story in real time as long as we can reliably detect bad guys on our network and know what they're doing and watch them and that kind of stuff. So again, we're not talking about hacking back, but what we are talking about is allowing a human being to be the response entity to an actual attack. See, without cyber deception, if you look at the way that our security programs work, we exclusively pit technology against human beings. The attacker is a human being, and they are motivated, they are creative, they are intelligent, they are adaptive. And so when we stick a technology which is static in front of them, they find ways around it. What about if we can have a defensive human being now countering the actions of the attacker? That defensive human being is also motivated, intelligent, creative, adaptive, and oh, by the way, the defender typically has more tools, more budget, more support, all of those types of things. So the defenders end up actually having a significant advantage over the attackers. So again, this aspect of taking back the advantage. So the fact of the matter is that as we talk about cyber deception, it provides all of these benefits. Now, notice when I started this out, I talked exclusively about attack detection. The fact of the matter is, if I came up to you without any pretext or precursor or whatever, and I said, I've got a technology that can allow you to detect and respond to attacks more quickly, that can allow you to delay, distract, and deter attackers, stop attacks before they even happen. It will facilitate the active collection of environment-specific cyber threat intelligence without suffering a breach. It can facilitate more effective and lower effort threat hunting, and it can allow us to actively engage the attacker in real time. If I threw all of that out you at the beginning of this, you'd be looking at me going, Kevin, there's no possible way. There's no way that a single technology can do all of this. But the fact of the matter is, it absolutely could. But I want the key piece here focused on. It is not a single technology. It is a strategy that uses technology. And so I strongly recommend you guys take a look at some of the options that are available from a cyber deception perspective. Obviously, Cybertrap has a deception technology that you can go ahead and take a look at that can help you facilitate all of these things. Now, let's say you have now bought into this and you're like, yes, I want to do this cyber deception stuff. How do I go about doing it? Well, one approach is just go and implement the technology, right? You can go out and purchase Cybertrap, implement it in your environment, and be up and running in very short order. And that will work. But if you want to maximize your capabilities, there's a couple things you really want to focus on. First of all, understand and prioritize your goals. We talked about a lot of value propositions, right? Detection, threat intelligence, distraction, delay, active engagement. You don't need to do all of those things at the same time, particularly when you're starting off. So what you want to do is to say, well, why am I trying to do cyber deception? What is my primary goal? Now, you can literally select all of the above if you want to. You can also say, well, today my primary goal is more accurate and more rapid detection of attackers. And then I will expand that as I become more comfortable with deception. And that is fine too. What I want you to do, though, is to start off with understanding what your goal is. Now, once you've understood what your goal is, we need to start thinking about what we want the attacker to do in order to achieve the goals that we have established. See, deception is first and foremost about attempting to manipulate the behavior of the adversary. We're not trying to get the attacker to think something, we're trying to get the attacker to actually do something. We need to be very clear about what that is. I want the attacker to interact with my deceptive solutions. I want the attacker to focus on these deceptive systems versus the production systems. I want the attacker, if they interact with production systems, to get redirected off of those production systems as quickly as possible. I want the attacker to just decide not to attack me because they think it's going to be too difficult. I don't really care what you want the attacker to do. Identify what the behavior you want to elicit that will accomplish your goal. Then you need to jump into, all right, well, how do I convince the attacker to do what I want them to do? Or what information do I need to present to them to get them to take the desired action? After we understand that, we start looking at things like, well, what channels of communication do I have in order to convey that information? Now, by a channel of communication, we're really looking at placing resources in locations where the attackers are likely to bump into them. That could be bumping into them while doing reconnaissance. It could be while they're scanning our target environment, while they're interacting, while they're moving laterally, whatever. Credentials placed in memory would be a channel of communication. A deceptive host that can be port scanned on the network would be a channel of communication. So how is the attacker going to learn about the information that I want them to know in order to influence their decision-making process? And this is where you start getting into the strategy of cyber deception. I also want to highlight that as we talk about cyber deception, we are talking about influence, not control. Cyber deception could easily be categorized as what are called influence operations. But understand that influence is not control. We're not talking about binary situations. We're talking about likelihood. An attacker has a specific likelihood of interacting with any deceptive information you put out there. If they do interact with it, they have a specific likelihood of making different types of decisions. So the more we know about attackers' behavior, the more we know about attackers' motivations, the more we can affect their behavior, because we understand what their goals are, we understand what their objectives are, their desires are, what they're afraid of, what they're drawn towards, and we can paint our deceptive picture to match up with that. In fact, if we understand what our goals are, if we define what we want the attacker to do, if we define what information is necessary to get them to make that decision, and then if we understand those channels of communication, that is how we influence that behavior. And that's going to be really important. So as we talk about cyber deception, we have this amazing capability. We have the capability of rapidly detecting attackers with very little to no false positives. We can distract or delay the attackers, keep them away from our production environment, give us more time to effectively detect them. We can even, as we talked about before, deter attacks before they even happen, either by the attacker becomes aware that deception is there. They decide that they want to go someplace easier. We could create the impression of more security than we actually have to sort of scare away attackers. We can even negatively influence the attacker's reconnaissance and weaponization phases, things that we have heretofore been unable to do with any other security technologies that are out there. We can collect environment-specific threat intelligence without requiring us to suffer the harm of a security breach. We can do low work effort threat trapping, right, as opposed to threat hunting. And we can even get involved in the active manipulation of attacker activities by allowing a human being in real time to manipulate the deceptive story that is presented to the attackers. And if we put all of this stuff together, we are talking about quite literally a technological concept, a strategy that is far and away beyond the capabilities that we have ever had. You don't need to do all of it. You can start simple. You can start with a really simple sort of detection technology, but understand the overall value proposition and capabilities we can get from cyber deception. Take a look at it. Give it a shot. get a demo of it, analyze it. Don't take my word for it. Dig into this stuff, learn about it on your own, and I promise you, when you understand the capabilities and the power of cyber deception as a security strategy, your entire view of the information security world will change. So take a look at it. Hopefully this has been valuable.